Welcome everyone to today's event on navigating Singapore's biotech startup ecosystem presented by SGInnovate and Singapore Consortium for Synthetic Biology, also known as SINERGY. I am Ziying from SGInnovate, and if you are new to us, we are a government-owned organization in Singapore with the mission to build deep tech innovations from Singapore to the world. We invest in and help build deep tech startups in the fields of artificial intelligence, medtech, and quantum tech, just to name a few. We work with scientists and clinicians to help bring their innovative research from lab to market, and we also develop tech talents and engage with a vibrant deep tech ecosystem. Today, we are very grateful and honored to present the first of our events together with SINERGY, and also our first event this year on the topic of biotech and the life science ecosystem in Singapore. We hope you'll be able to gain insightful perspectives from our panel today. Do feel free to ask any questions you may have in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Before we hand over the time to Victor, SGInnovate's Director of Venture Investing, to introduce our panel of speakers for today, I'd like to invite Ning Mao of the Singapore Consortium for Synthetic Biology to say a few words. Ning, please.
Thank you, Zing, for the introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Ning, and I'm the manager of Singapore Consortium for Synthetic Biology. The SINERGY is an NRF-funded technology consortium with 4 research institutes and 16 industry members, and it's also growing. We promote academic industry collaborations and technology translation through organizing events and also providing research seed grants for synthetic biology-related projects. I'm very, very glad to have this opportunity to co-organize today's webinar with SGInnovate with such a brilliant lineup in the panel. I'm sure today's discussions will be very, very helpful for current and aspiring bio-entrepreneurs in Singapore. Thank you.
Thanks, Ning. Hi, everyone, and a very good morning to everyone in Singapore, and to everyone else from other parts of the world. Welcome. Today we have a really exciting panel, and on the topic of navigating Singapore's biotech startup ecosystem. And I want to start off by getting our panelists to quickly introduce themselves, and after sharing a bit more of myself. My name is Victor, and I am the Director of Venture Investing here at SGInnovate. I head up all our investments, in terms of we work with a lot of early stage companies, and up to Series A and B, to provide them with the right types of funds to navigate the deep tech space in Singapore. And I would like to welcome, maybe let's start with the lady. Wenqi, could we get an introduction? So maybe for the speakers, in terms of introductions, could you share with us your organization, your role, and most importantly, how did you get started in the biotech space? So
Sure.
Wenqi, please.
Yeah, thanks. Hi, Victor. Thanks for having me here today. As Victor mentioned, I'm from Lightstone Ventures. I'm the VP of Investments there. Lightstone Ventures is a global venture firm. We have offices in Boston, Menlo Park, Dublin, Ireland, as well as in Singapore. We generally focus on early stage life science opportunities, and we have a group of really seasoned investors, so years of experience in life science operations, management, as well as investing. And the stage where we typically invest is at the seed Series A, and we usually reserve between about 10 to 15 million US dollars per investment. We tend to invest very deeply into our companies. And within life sciences, our specific interests actually lie mostly in looking for highly innovative platform technologies that have therapeutic applications. And this could cover a really wide range of technologies, from drugs, biologics, cell and gene therapies, all the way through to therapeutic devices. And the Singapore fund that I'm part of, it was formed in 2015, 2016. The main desire for this fund is to actually help build the Singapore life science ecosystem. And with that in mind, one of our key mandates is to invest in and build globally competitive life science companies with a presence in Singapore. So not that different from SGInnovate's mission in life too. And part and parcel of this, we have been taking on a bit more of a venture creation role, where we actually are very active investors. We work very closely with founding scientists, develop the idea, craft the research plan, as well operation plans, and eventually play key roles in executing on those plans to build these companies in Singapore. So that's Lightstone in a nutshell. And as VP of investments within Lightstone, we we're involved in all aspects of the investment cycle, all the way from sourcing new innovations, opportunities in Singapore, to conducting due diligence on potential investment opportunities, and then down to working with the founding team, crafting the research operations plan, and finally executing on the plan together. So it's a all-in journey with us if we work with companies. And I guess you asked the last bit about how I got into this space, right? It's a bit of a chance, but as a scientist by training, biotech has always been near and dear to my heart. While pursuing my PhD at Stanford, I was very fortunate. I mean, the school is very open to a lot of entrepreneurship, everyone's very up and buzz about these things. So I was very lucky to get into this entrepreneurship boot camp organized by the business school, and it was really my first foray into what it means to ideate upon good ideas and creating prototypes, pitching the VCs, and actually working in a startup team, because that's very key to people. It really is the key to a lot of these great startups. And so coming back to Singapore, a group of friends of mine were involved in the Oxbridge Biotech Roundtable. They started it, and I was very lucky once again to meet them and be involved in helping bring this to rebrand it and transition it to what Biotech Connection is today. So all in all, just a little bits of information here and there really made me very interested in biotech. And once again, it was a very fortunate thing that right around the time when Ken Noonan, who's the managing partner for the Singapore Fund, was looking for for people to start the fund with here, I was introduced to him, and 4 years down the road, here I am.
Nice. And I think you've been involved with the firm for a while, and I guess you must be still having fun today. So let's move on to maybe Jeffrey. Hi, Jeff.
Sure, hi.
Yeah, would love to get the quick pitch on yourself, and the company and how you got started.
Sure thing, happy to do that, and thanks everyone for your time today. I think we have a really nicely attended session, so look forward to the panel. So I'm Jeff Liu. I'm the CEO, co-founder of a company called Engine Biosciences. So we got started out here in Singapore as a biotech company. We also have operations in the San Francisco Bay Area. Initially spun out of a couple institutions, so MIT, UCSD, and Mayo Clinic, with the vision of being able to bring together machine learning-based approaches, together with high throughput combinatorial CRISPR screening approaches in our own wet labs to generate our own data, and to really kind of play out the vision of the intersection of computation, data, and biology, which we believe is really going to be has already been transforming, but will continue to transform the pharmaceutical and biotech industries. I think we've actually had a really interesting journey over the last few years, building partially out of Singapore, and certainly I think some of the topics that we'll touch upon today, we'll cover some of those experiences. I've also had the pleasure and the opportunity to have been involved more in an advisory or a board director context in a few other biotech companies, including some out of Singapore. Companies like Enleofin, which we spun out of Duquesne, US, about 3 years ago, and did a deal with a large pharma company recently. Also a company out of the US that was recently acquired by Roche and Foundation Medicine. So I've had kind of experiences looking at different parts of the biotech ecosystem from different angles, but certainly primarily as an operator and entrepreneur at Engine. And in terms of kind of my personal story, I think this is probably it's non-traditional because I don't come from a scientific background. I got started actually 15 years ago in my career, first at a hedge fund trading. We were a long-short technology hedge fund. And then I moved to Bain & Company as a management consultant. And there I was a generalist, covered different industries, did cover some healthcare companies, but primarily it wasn't healthcare. So that I didn't make the jump immediately into biotech. I then transitioned, was hired by one of my clients, a well-known entrepreneur called Tony Fernandez. So I went to AirAsia, and there, I was joined a very entrepreneurial organization. I was given a mandate to lead strategy, lead part of the commercial teams, lead digital marketing, build data analytics across the 10,000 person company. And so I took that on, and ultimately we spent a lot of time building up the data side of the business, but also setting up for other companies that ultimately have been materialized quite nicely. Spent some time actually in the travel technology space because we did a deal with Expedia to set up a joint venture to basically build all the Expedia and other online travel branded sites here in Asia, headquartered out of Singapore. And I took on a role there as the CEO's deputy and building up data analytics, building up strategy, et cetera. to the point where in 2015 it was acquired by Expedia. You know, and I got a real appreciation, I think, during those 4 or 5 years of, you know, the value of big data as a general concept, and the value and really the transformational opportunities of using the computing power that we have now, and, you know, the machine learning, other algorithmic approaches to actually drive decision making in a much more logical fashion than previously possible. And so I just kind of got to thinking about what would this mean in the healthcare or biotech context, in a context in which we have the opportunity to potentially touch more lives more directly. And so, you know, I started kind of exploring these concepts together with different scientific founders, different academics, people who bring something to the table I definitely didn't have, and ultimately came up with the concept of Engine. And hence, kind of what we're doing at Engine really does come from you know, a bit of a personal journey that's led me to this point. And so we'll be able to discuss that a little bit more.
Yeah, we would love to hear a bit more about that as we go into our discussion. And Max, tell us more about yourself.
Hey guys, so currently I'm the co-founder and chief strategist for a food tech company here called Turtle Tree Lab. I'm originally from California, and actually my background is also very different from the scientific side. I'm a computer engineer by training, but I've been in the leadership position for about 15 years. Was a CEO of a company and a cloud-based company previously. But through my journey, it's been quite interesting. I moved out to Singapore a few years ago after I made an exit from my previous company. And during my conversations, or I was giving a talk at Google, and that's where I ran into my co-founder. But I really did not see this coming, to be honest with you. I did not think I would make this transition into biotech. However, you know, it was amazing because we saw a major gap. We saw the food security issues here in Singapore, this huge push by the government with a 30 by 30, and we saw an opportunity to make a change. This is something that's been near and dear to my heart, sustainability over the last 10 to 15 years. I just haven't had the opportunity to be a part of it. So the timing was just right. And what we're doing is we're using cell biology and biotech to create milk from pretty much all mammals. And we have first few targets of what we're doing now around human milk and bovine milk. But the potential is endless. We are very fortunate. We just won the Temasek Livability Challenge recently. And yeah, that's the journey so far.
Nice.
But when Jeff mentioned high throughput and computational biology, it's quite exciting because you would think that the engineering and computer science has nothing to do with biotech, but actually it's becoming a big part of it. A lot of this high technology is becoming very, very necessary in all this data. So that's a little bit about myself.
Thanks. Okay, so let's get down to the meat of today's session. Before we begin, I'll just remind all our 157 participants, you know, that we do have a Q&A section where you can ask your questions. So try to not ask the questions in the main chat because that makes it really confusing for all of us. Put your questions in the Q&A. We'll try to address them right at the end, you know, as much as we are able to. So yeah, so looking forward to the questions. Okay, everyone, so let's start the discussion by thinking about kind of like how we want to frame biotech, right? So I've asked many people in the past week, you know, in terms of what in their mind is the biotech industry within Singapore and globally, right? And I think the definition has evolved in the past few decades, you know, so I wanted to understand from you really quickly, right? How would you explain what the biotech industry is to someone who is really new to it, right? Half a minute, you know. Anyone just take a stab? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just take a stab, but I think you know, what I would kind of say is I think the way we conceive biotech today, I think is actually quite different from 10, 20, 30 years ago. So, you know, biotech, I think originally meant companies like Genentech that were working on like biologics versus small molecules, right? But I think right now, and that's really for the pharmaceutical domain, but I think right now you're starting to see so many different companies that use biology as the basis for new products and new solutions. So just on this call, you're hearing Max, you know, use that in the food space, right? And then for our company, we're doing therapeutics, but not necessarily restricted just to using like antibodies, for example. So I think I would think about biotech as being any kind of obviously somewhat technology or science-driven company that is using biology in a way to ultimately create products or impact for society.
Nice. And that's super concise because I spent like, so I tried to Google this right, in terms of how people actually would actually have an impression of it by the biotech industry when they Google, and man, it's super confusing because it covers everything from agriculture, pharmaceuticals, chemicals, nanotech, and I think maybe for today's discussion, I'm gonna try and limit our discussion to areas around life sciences, right? Because I think that's one of the big areas that SINERGY is trying to help to develop, and I think the expertise on the panel today is covering areas around that. Right? So let's focus some of the discussion around life sciences, and maybe for that, how globally, what do you think are some of the opportunities that are especially exciting within the space today, right? And what has driven the rise of these opportunities? As Jeff, as you rightly pointed out, it has changed, right? And there are a lot of new opportunities. So what are these opportunities? So would love to have sharing on this.
So maybe I'll pick up where Jeff left off. There's really a lot more focus, at least from what we see, on a lot of tackling complex systems, and as Jeff mentioned, right, combination of technology with biology in any shape, way, or form, be it adding AI, be it adding just massive data plays, or simply just creating some sort of engineering around it to actually fit in with the biological concepts. So we see a lot more of these complex plays coming up in the ecosystem. But of course, the traditional areas of huge importance, not to say the least, oncology is still huge. I mean, immuno-oncology has taken on this fever pitch that is kind of crazy right now. There's so many companies, everybody's doing some sort of immuno-oncology, engagers or antibodies, all sorts of things, right? So it's really a really interesting world right now with a lot of technology that has made making biology less expensive than before. Sequencing is really lower cost right now, and the cell therapy is trying to find ways to reduce costs. So it's an interesting place for us to be right now, to see all this convergence of technology with biology.
Sorry, Max, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say some of the most exciting areas that I see is really around the high throughput, microfluidics as well. What's really happening is a lot of these different technologies that usually took a year to 2 years to go through this process to select, say, for example, certain enzymes that are valuable, now can happen in a matter of weeks or months. So the time's been dramatically because of these amazing technologies. Berkeley Lights, for example, is a big one in the Bay Area, as well as a number of others. And I'm sure Jeff also got some technology as well that can enable that.
And just based on that, now that we do understand that there's more technology available and there's a lot more funding available, what do you believe are some of the most important problems that are being solved in the space, right, by the companies?
For us, in the food side, what we have seen over the last several years is actually a lot of work around media development and fact growth. These are these very expensive consumables that all scientists know about. But in the food side, you have to be able to bring the price down dramatically to be able to make it, usable for the food grade products that are out there. And I think that's one of the most exciting areas. We've had a lot of development, a lot of companies that are working on this, including right here in Singapore. And what's exciting about that is not just in food. Once the prices come down dramatically, will actually impact the price for therapeutics as well. The R&D around that. There are some huge opportunities for a lot of startups globally, but this is a big area that I believe is making an impact.
Yeah, and so to answer that question also, from thinking about the therapeutics or the pharmaceutical sector, I think the way we kind of think about it, there's a lot of opportunities both in terms of process optimization, which I can talk about, but also in terms of kind of product development, product optimization. So process optimization in the drug development is notoriously expensive and time consuming, right? And obviously very, very complex. So when you really kind of it's very easy to say we're transforming drug development or discovery, but when you really break that down into its constituent components, each one of those actually could justify companies, and certainly have it for in the past couple of decades. So I think a lot of exciting things are happening right now in sort of the preclinical side. So applying AI or similar tools on chemistry. We don't do that engine as much as some of the other companies do. But I think that's certainly something that is starting to bear fruit. You're starting to see some of these molecules make their ways towards the clinic. We'll hopefully see how they perform. On the other side of drug development is having, in addition to having a molecule, you really want to have a better target, and you really want to actually understand the disease biology, which we would argue is the most important question. Having the right target for the right patient, and so they're certainly having the ability to use data to give us a direct link from very early on to human biology. So we're de-risking it at the beginning, and instead of waiting 5-10 years into clinical trials to de-risk a program is critical. Having the computing power is obviously great, but it's also really important to be able to, again, de-risk and validate any kind of predictions or hypotheses as soon as possible before you get into humans. And I think tools like CRISPR-Cas, which we do deploy at Engine, and other tools allow us to actually probe and ultimately engage with biology in a dramatically different way than we had before. So I'd say that's really exciting. I would say that there are a lot of tools and optimizations being done at the clinical trial process, and even kind of post-approval, which are actually meaningful in helping to optimize the delivery of therapeutics to the patient. So I would say there's just a ton of opportunity just because of how important pharmaceuticals in healthcare is, and how just fundamentally complex it is. It means that's a lot of opportunity to take and bring simplicity. I just want to say one word about therapeutics on the product side. I'm not going to talk about them in as much detail, but ultimately, in many cases, it's not most businesses in biotech have been built around ultimately come up with a better drug, right? So I think whether you use these processes to get there faster or cheaper or de-risk them better, that's one way to do it. And of course, there are new technologies like cell therapies, gene therapies, antibody drug conjugates. There's so many different things that you can do to actually engineer a better solution that can help you modulate the disease biology that you want in vivo. So I would say that there's certainly a ton of opportunities on the product side in addition to processes.
And Wenqi, for you, as an investor, where are you putting your money, in the next 4 to 8 years?
I mean, the areas that are really interesting to us, and touching a bit on what Jeff has mentioned about the target biology side too, is really the intersection of a lot of the quote-unquote newer areas of interest, like metabolism, inflammation, microbiome, and all these things are kind of, they were all silos before, but with the advent of a lot of data crunching, plus a lot of new technologies that are in place, be it all the platforms that Jeff has mentioned earlier too, it has become possible to actually interrogate all these multiple different areas to find novel linkages that were probably difficult to identify before. And targeting them has also taken on a new spin to it, where you have so many new modalities. You can do gene therapy, you can do RNA-based technology, you can even do cell therapy, biologics in general, antibodies, you just name it. You can possibly have something right now that you can work on, actually create a therapeutic or drug for. So it's really that those areas are looking in beyond the traditional, which is a small molecule or traditional areas where you're looking really in only one area of interest, or you're looking only very, very narrowly. I think the best way to, the most important problems right now is to find personalized medicine for a really broad suite of intersection of technology or areas of interest.
Yeah, thanks. And interesting. So, and then based on what you described, where do you see these companies coming from? Where do you see these innovations and these ideas coming from? Is there a specific part of the world, which is really good for this? And I don't mean this as in any way to disservice to Singapore, but I think the audience should know, right? Where are the innovations happening, right? And later on, we can segue to kind of like, what is the role that Singapore can play in this larger ecosystem? So yeah, would love to understand kind of like where should we be looking?
Yeah, so I mean, the interesting thing about technology is it follows where money goes. So if you look at where most the healthcare dollars are spent in the world, right? I mean, naturally, I mean, the largest is still the U.S. and China is growing really fast and a close competitor, but nonetheless, it really is where the money is, right? So there's a lot of investment. There's a lot of in motivation, let's call it, into new innovation. So naturally, a lot of these companies that we have been talking about briefly in terms of the new innovative platforms and new technologies, engineering ways of putting everything together. A lot of them are based in the US. The technology may not have started in the US. For some of them, they were brought in from the EU or elsewhere in the world, but somehow or other, some part of them end up in the US.
Okay, makes sense. Do you guys have different have anything else?
I mean, I think she's absolutely right about the fact that coming from the U.S., I know most of these companies are in the U.S. A lot of funding is there, but you would also, well, why are we as a food tech company here in Singapore? I think there's some other things outside of money that are also very valuable, and that is for us, it's been the support of ESG, from the Singapore Food Agency. A-Star, there's been quite a bit of different technologies we've been able to leverage on. The ecosystem is also very important. And I think for us, Singapore has been tremendous. So I think we're one of the very few places around the world today that they do work than many of the other places and able to continue our work. So nice. Outside of funding, I think these are some other benefits.
Yeah. So I guess I'm going to move on to the second part of this, and that's kind of like developing on what Max is saying. Let's dive into kind of a biotech and the ecosystem, the startups in Singapore, right? And so the number one question on everyone's minds is, what does a small country like Singapore have to contribute to this global ecosystem? Right, and Max is right. This pandemic has actually made Singapore one like a pretty good location to be in. In terms of being able to continue working. But beyond that, right? Are there actual material advantages of being in Singapore? Anyone?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that. I think because we've gone through that journey in a bit. Maybe I'll first touch upon a little bit about your previous question, which is to say that I completely agree a lot when you really look at companies and financing events, et cetera, predominantly happening in the U.S. and you're seeing more and more in China, et cetera. But that's not a one-to-one correlation to where I think the talent or the scientific innovation is happening. Okay. I think Singapore, as well as other geographies, they're great scientists. There's obviously the fruits of some of the public funding into academic research certainly has some results and impact in that sense, right? So if you kind of translate that forward, I think there are specific areas of excellence, so to speak, whether it's within talent or actually certain scientific discoveries or know-how that exist in Singapore. So that could be one thing that one could leverage upon in Singapore. I think another potential area, and that I've often thought could be quite exciting. There's an advantage of being a small and reasonably coordinated country, which is that when you talk about the biotech industry, even at the early stage, there's a lot of interdependencies. If you're talking about data, you're talking about kind of access from clinical access. You're talking about researchers across different functions. The ability to have that kind of 1 square mile, a couple square miles, is something that could be a big advantage in Singapore if there was a real kind of if there was kind of this real interactive component to it. I mean, I think one of the reasons Boston has done incredibly well is because there's this one square mile or so around Kendall Square where a lot of people are congregating. I'm not suggesting necessarily we're going to be replicating that, but also to say that when I compare Singapore versus places like in China or the Bay Area where we are at, it's just fundamentally more spread out, and there's less of a ability for a kind of strong central push to bring these different pieces together in some way. I'm not saying that necessarily we've substantiated that fully here in Singapore, but I think that is actually a real opportunity for the country.
Nice. And maybe sorry, Wenjie, do you want to?
Oh no, sorry.
Oh, okay. So maybe could you so like let's say if Singapore does provide some kind of advantage, are there specific areas that you believe that we're exceptionally strong in? And I ask this in the context of the next question, which is going to be some of the key challenges and that we face, as an ecosystem in Singapore, whether it's for biotech or just for the startup ecosystem in general, right? So do you believe that are there specific areas where Singapore can play a role in biotech at the global level, and what are those areas?
If I can add to that or touch on that a little bit, we believe it's actually on the regulatory side for us. I mean, if we were in California or in the US, working with the FDA, it's a very long process, and even though we are doing this in parallel, but when you look at the feedback and you look at the collaboration, we are able to work with the Singapore agency and get feedback much quicker. This helps us to iterate, helps us to advance much faster. Plus, we think that these different areas, once again, outside of funding, are very valuable to the success and the early success of our product when we go to market.
Yeah, I think another area that I think we're really good at is that, because I mean, a bit related between your current question and the previous one, is that we have a really talented pool of scientists. So discovery actually is it's really good to do discovery in Singapore. I mean, we have wide-ranging expertise in terms of the scientists, and in a lot of the biological science areas, they are really top-notch. I mean, you'll find them publishing in really good journals globally. So I think that definitely is an area that we can strengthen and really build into. Plus, Jeff mentioned, I'll call it the kampong spirit, right? It's really a small island. We have everyone interconnected. SGInnovate, ESG, with all the various agencies plus NRF, everyone's just chipping in, and everyone is at the same table, talking the same language, and really wanting to drive this forward. So that, plus the great science, is a nice melting pot for a really good discovery mecca here.
But and so when maybe on that point, so as you've been in this space for quite a number of years, has there been a rise in the total number of startups in the biotech space, based on what you've seen? Like, we have all these advantages, but has there actually been a quantitative raise in numbers? And after that, I'm going to ask you, has there been a qualitative raise in standards, in the sector?
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, with all these things and growing recognition that, startup is not something we shun, because probably 5-7 years ago, when everyone's still big on MNCs, like joining a big MNC in the research function is the best thing you can do as a scientist, or next best thing to being a faculty member somewhere. But now, being in a startup and actually having your ideas spun out on the technology has really taken on a different light, that it's actually some feasible idea. It's actually a good idea. If it's a good idea, we should pursue it, because it could be good for me, for my science, for my fellow members of the biotech ecosystem too. So to your point, there has been a real uptick in the number of companies. Maybe not many companies per se right now, but there are really a lot of good ideas that are being floated around, and what it really needs right now is a good hand in trying to pick out good ones that can be shaped and grown and built into truly globally competitive life science companies.
Interesting. And so has there been like a rise in number of startups in Singapore? Like just based on the trends, right? Like you used to see maybe like 20 deal flow. Do you see like 40? Like how much more do you actually see in this space?
Wow. Predominantly we see a lot more on the biotech side. Not so much on the I mean the devices, diagnostics, they've kind of been quite stable, and we see quite a number of them from the beginning. But I think on the biotech side is really doubled, tripled, or almost the numbers.
Nice.
That's a good trend, right? I'm sure there's a lot more out there too.
and of that number, like quality wise, right? Has that been improving in terms of the hit rate as an investor?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think the concept of trying to create a globally competitive company is definitely foremost on a lot of people's minds right now, rather than trying to be the best in Singapore, which will probably not get very far.
Agree, 100%. I always tell our startups, if your market is just Singapore, I think you can step out of the door right now, There's, I think market-wise we're way too small, right? And as people within the ecosystem, we want to think big, and this helps us to develop our overall community in a much faster and accelerated way. So next point on this is so we know that there are sufficient resources in Singapore. There's talent in Singapore. There are ideas, right? And there's definitely a good trend in terms of us trending upwards. Knowing this, what are some of the key challenges that you believe that are stopping folks from getting into the industry? Whether it's from a researcher, academic point of view, getting into to start a startup, to someone who's trying to come into Singapore to actually set up something, right? What are some of the unique challenges in operating a life science startup in Singapore? And this is one question that I always ask: does being located in Singapore make it easier or more difficult, to start, grow, and scale your company, right? Because for some businesses, being in Singapore is actually a curse, right? Because you actually move way slower, But for the life sciences, right, is it a case whereby being in Singapore actually is, the right stimulant to accelerate your growth?
Yeah, I'll take a first stab at that, and I think there were I think there are kind of two questions embedded in that, but I'll make sure I touch on the second part about how you about growth. I think the reality is again, biotech, whichever kind of sector you're focused on within biotech application, it is very complex, right? So I think when you talk about the talent, the people and the expertise that's being put around the table, that's perennially a challenge no matter where you are. And certainly Singapore is no different. I think, we certainly agree there's great research out here, great discovery scientists you can bring to the table. I think, a challenge that will often be faced by therapeutics-oriented companies, finding kind of more experience, people who have seen drugs in the later part of drug discovery, preclinical, clinical development, and then critically having kind of the, business or general management kind of experience to take this to, as you guys were saying, kind of globally competitive scale. So I think that's fundamentally a challenge just because the industry is relatively nascent as compared to other ecosystems. And while there are pharma companies here, there haven't been the same amount of pharma companies or biotech companies that have scaled in the past, because you typically see that those are the ones that ultimately create a diaspora that finds its way to biotech companies. So that's a key challenge. Obviously, we can talk about financing or other aspects too, but I think talent is probably one of the key ones. So I guess in terms of how it relates into building companies, I actually think it's pretty easy and straightforward and quick to start a company in Singapore and spin something out. Now, there are a lot of dependencies around spin outs, so I don't think that's every single case. But I think in terms of being able to leverage, obviously, different funding agencies, finding angel investors, pulling together a team of a few, handful of scientists to get a concept going, setting up a company, and Singapore is very business friendly. That I don't think is a major bottleneck. I think it's really that next step, which is when the company needs to start thinking about scaling, or actually going from a project to a real company, where I think there's a real challenge here in Singapore. And so I don't think that's a challenge to deter people, but it's one that should be actually thought about transparently. And then as one builds a company, one needs to think about how do you scale, and the path is going to be different depending on what you're trying to do.
And Jeff, in your experience as a company, like for Engine in this case, right, for Engine Biosciences, is funding an issue out of Singapore? And as you raise subsequent rounds, do you have to keep looking globally for those investors, or has it always been a global search for investors from the beginning?
Yeah, I think funding for any startup is always a primary concern, right? So I would say that's and if you can, the smartest thing to do is have have access to diverse pools of capital, and ultimately you can decide who you want to work with, right? But I would say certainly for us, we didn't start and only look at Singapore from day one, and the genesis of the company really isn't purely in Singapore. I mean, we decided to build part of it in Singapore because we believe in what we can do here. But a lot of the founding IP, the founding scientists are based in the U.S., and I'm originally from there. So we started by looking and speaking to people globally. And I would actually say it's not just US or Singapore. Obviously, China's really important. Japan is really is still the #3 largest pharmaceutical market in the world. Very strong pharma companies, good investors, and obviously in Europe too. There's a lot of good European investors. So I would say that capital is more and more global these days, right? And so that's a benefit for companies based out of Singapore.
Yeah. That's fair. And Max, from the perspective of a young company, especially a company like Turtle Tree, which does require a higher regulatory hurdles, do you think being in Singapore offers you any advantages in the development of your product and eventual business?
Sure. I personally think that being in Singapore, as I mentioned earlier, being able to work with the regulatory folks very early on, iterate very quickly, is very important. Now, in parallel, we are working with the regulatory bodies around the world, including in the US. But this gives us a lot of, we will build a lot of knowledge around what we need to do. We do have a division within our company that's led by a scientist. Her name is Chin Mai. She leads our regulatory side. But we're able to work together with the regulatory bodies here. That's very important for us as we look at how we're going to navigate regionally and globally. But you're absolutely right. The regulatory is going to be a big challenge early on that we need to lead.
And for Wenqi, you're not escaping this. As an investor, what has been the biggest challenges that you've seen companies face as you go through the investment case, right? As you look at them, what have been the bigger challenges that they face as a company, and that worries you as an investor?
Yeah, so echoing what Jeff mentioned earlier, the management and early stage leaders who have been there, done that, what we'll call the recycled CEOs, right? Who've been there, sold a company, came back and recycled again. And beyond the CEOs and middle managers, the ones who have been in big pharma companies, they have led large teams of R&D folks, and they understand how the drug development process goes, even in the traditional sense, or even in the more modern biotech definition sense. So all these folks are very key in building a really successful company. And sometimes, that first step, when you're actually setting up the structure and the strategy of company, you have a really great idea, but if your first strategy takes the wrong step, sometimes it's just really difficult to rewind and go back to square zero and start again. So where we lack, I think, is in that, if you have a great technology, what is that best first step you should take and you must take? If not, you will not be able to succeed. I think that's where the scientists here in Singapore, the great technologists here, they may not have as good of an idea because of one lack of the mentorship. There aren't as many of these seasoned CEOs or seasoned research directors who are here to guide.
And the last question on this point, right? For aspiring entrepreneurs and folks who want to get involved in this, what do you see as the typical exit trajectory of companies within the space, that start out of Singapore, right? And what kind of timeline are we thinking about, So as for folks who are potentially going to be employees, who potentially want to found their own companies, how should they be thinking about that lifespan?
Well, I'll take a quick step first, and I'm sure the other two have good ideas to point out too. In terms of how we think about an exit, I mean, for people who are interested in startup company, especially in the life science sector, I think you can't go in thinking, I'm going to exit this in like 2-3 years because I'm going to IPO or NASDAQ or something like that, right? That'll be a little, it's possible, but it's probably not the best foot forward. And I would prefer if people come in and say, I'm going to hunker down. This is my baby, my project. I'm here to start, create, build, and I want to see it till it gets to clinic. And whatever opportunities come along the way, we'll assess it and we'll think about it that way rather than I'm going to build an IPO company in 2 years' time. So I'll say a trajectory, think long term, like 7, 8, 10 years, and if good opportunities come for partnering, for IPO, for other exit strategies in the meantime, please explore them.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think focus 100% on how you're creating value for the company, how you can grow, learn. Because remember, you're going to iterate many times. No matter what anybody says, you're always going to be pivoting left and right, looking at how you're going to enhance the company's value. So that has to be the first focus, especially for us in food tech. This is a long journey. that's really what we have to focus on. What type of partners you to work with, how you can envision your product on the market, how you see contract manufacturing. There's just so many other things to consider. Looking at exit strategies and so forth is always very premature in my perspective. That doesn't mean you don't ever think about where you achieve yourself, because remember, dream, the reason why we're doing this, we dream about what we want to do with our lives and what we want our baby to become. But
yeah, I would just maybe just chime in and add my thoughts on this. I think this is one of the last questions. I think I completely agree with people what Wenqi and Max have said. I think you know, the biggest, most valuable problems or meaningful problems typically take longer and more effort to solve, right? And that's just that's the reality. That said, what I would say is that, you know, something that's quite interesting in biotech, quote unquote biotech today, that can dispel some myths or some misconceptions is, you know, you can often look at the fact it takes maybe 10, 15 years traditionally to develop a drug from concept towards approval, and assume that's kind of the life cycle of a company. And yet the reality is that, you know, if you look at the dynamics of the industry, over 50% of pharmaceutical companies' pipeline were acquired or brought in from the outside. And so clearly there's some kind of liquidity event that happens for the company when that happens. The other thing you're seeing, and you're especially seeing in the last few months, but certainly a long-term trend, has been companies being able to access the public markets earlier, you know, even as soon as within a couple of years from conception in some cases. And so I don't think doing an IPO is strictly for an entrepreneur and exit. I think actually most people wouldn't think about it that way. It's really another way to access cheaper capital, broader capital, et cetera. But, you know, for investors, certainly, you know, there's I think optionality for quicker liquidity paths than purely kind of waiting for the product to get to, you know, approval or, you know, clinical proof of concept, so to speak. And certainly we've seen that happen. I've personally seen that happen with Leofin. It was a pretty quick build, and then got acquired. That was not planned, but it just happened such that the data stood for itself and the excitement stood for itself, and that just made sense to the people around the table. In other cases, I would say, especially if you're building a company versus trying to develop a product, you definitely have to be prepared to take this, you know, longer and through multiple financing events and through multiple potential explorations of partnering or other liquidity paths.
Yeah, makes sense. So the last segment that we have is in terms of thinking about how we build for biotech's future in Singapore and beyond, right? And I think, you know, I would like to pick on your brains to find out, is there something as a community that we can do, you know, and what should we be doing, you know, in terms of our various roles as founders, you know, young founders of young startups, founders of a more mature startup, you know, investors like Wenqi and myself, you know, what is our role in building a community, and what kind of resources, you know, can we try to fight for that could better support bio entrepreneurs in Singapore? And in your daily lives, what have you seen that I think could be improved upon?
If I can just say one thing that I find myself doing quite a bit, and we do a lot, is anytime we see new startup founders who are looking for advice or looking for guidance, we are always open to that. I enjoy doing that. One thing that Jeff mentioned very, very much earlier is that business development side, global side, any Singapore companies sometimes don't have the, I guess, larger vision, global vision, or and even a perspective from the other side, from the global side. And I think that's something that a lot of the startups here can work on. We are always happy to help. I'm sure the other folks here as well. I think educating, mentoring, and a lot of young folks who are looking to do their own thing is going to be big of what we need to do as a community to continue getting this ecosystem built up.
Perfect.
Yeah, absolutely echo Max's point. Like you know, talking to people and networking, it is a people business no matter what. You know, getting the right people together, getting the right ideas together. It's all about who you meet, who you talk to, how you actually understand and shape your idea. So finding the right people, or anybody actually, just talk to as many people as possible, and with talking to more people, your ideas will shape and they'll mature too. So it really is a networking business.
And so like, do you where should we encourage our interested folks to kind of start this journey? You know, so for people who are mid-career folks who are looking to find a new venture, right, or to join a company, or or entrepreneurs, academics, how should they get started? And what are the paths that you've seen that people take when they start diving into the biotech industry?
Yeah, it's a great question. I might talk. I'll offer a few thoughts, but certainly there's a lot of tactical things you can think about doing if you're really, depending on what you're trying to do. But I would say, no matter what you're trying to do, I would think a lot about the end goals. What's this? You may have an interesting technology, or you may be interested in a certain opportunity, but really, what's the solution you're trying to create? Really pressure test if that's meaningful. Understand who else is trying to work on that problem, and really map out. At least try to, as a thought experiment, map out what it's going to take to get there. Because once you do that, you can identify, what the gaps are, what the key challenges are that you're going to need to pressure test more. Because I think the critical step early on is trying to broaden your scope and following what others were saying, kind of get different points of feedback from different people with the relevant experience and relevant inputs to what you want to do. But the only way you can do that is not by kind of indiscriminately talking to people. In my opinion, I think you got to really have something of a thesis or certain things that you want to actually test out in those conversations. Inherent to that is you've got to be honest about where no one is complete. Certainly individually, no team is probably generally complete at the early stage. So really being honest about assessing where the gaps are, what you need to fill, how to fill them, trying to take an ego-free approach to getting that feedback and getting those inputs, such that you can ultimately substantiate and build and execute towards that vision or solution that you've laid out.
Thanks. So, okay, so I'll stop us there in terms of the formal format, and actually jump to the Q&A, because there are actually quite a number of questions with a lot of upvotes. and I think this will be quite fun to talk about. The first one is from Raquel, and the question is: additionally, and in the local Singapore context, is there sufficient infrastructure to support for the necessary ramp up to turning research collaborations into profitable industry players? So meaning that, in Singapore, I think we probably answered a bit of that already. Sorry. Okay, sorry. Let's move on to the next one. From Drew, the engineering and biology and technology thesis is popular with both investors and startups. Yet in the UK, for example, 40% of startups that claim they use AI don't. So the question for everyone is, what are you seeing internally, locally, and more broadly about how companies are actually able to successfully implement and connect these disciplines, and how mature is this approach?
Yeah, I can take a stab at this. I get this question. We think about this a lot in our company.
I can imagine. I can imagine.
So look, I think AI. It's very easy to use when there are buzzwords that are hot like AI. I think it's easy to latch onto those, and for logical reasons, right? I would say I think what you're seeing globally is, in terms of where AI is in biotech and drug development. If you go back like 5, 6, 7, 6 years, you would see a lot of companies who are kind of purely looking at using in silico AI approaches to try to transform everything, right? And I know I'm simplifying it. I know that's not necessarily what all companies are trying to do, but I think the reality and the realization is that, actually AI is only as good as your data, and as good as the validation cycle that you have, such that you can actually test and learn. And so I think what you're seeing is a much greater appreciation for the fact of not just about where your starting point data is, because that's always been, I think, a key question, but whether you're able to control the quality of that data, as well as having large quantities, which are kind of all around the world. And do you actually have an internal wet lab or an experimental system or something that actually solves the physical bottlenecks that happen in research? Because frankly speaking, most of the algorithms that people use are not actually novel, and they don't need to be. The novelty is whether you're actually generating data and you're actually being able to prove it and train your algorithms to get better and better over time. So I think you're seeing that in across geographies. I think here in Singapore, I don't think it's certainly escaping that trend. So I think if you're, purely looking at an AI approach, I think there's I think you'd have to think about, really what is your strategic advantage, because a lot of people can develop an algorithm in a silo, and its relative competitiveness may not actually be as great as you think.
Thank you. Next question is from Cheng Kai. With the increasing interdisciplinarity required for scientific advancement, more talent is required to develop novel technologies. So where do you see the expertise necessary for such deep tech work being developed, and how can we develop these talents? And the additional part added by Timothy is, on top of that, how can we how do we attract talents towards these fields, and how do we get students, right, and from high school onwards to be interested in this space?
Yeah, maybe I'll take a quick stab at that. I mean, a lot of deep tech, I guess here we're basically talking about biotech, right? So not deep tech as a whole large sphere, right? In biotech, I think it really comes down to getting, there's a lot of interest already. I don't think the interest has waned in biotech in general. We get a lot of people training themselves to be researchers, scientists, and from there, where we really need to plug the gap is having them understand that good ideas can be grown, can be developed, and you need to find ways to grow them. It's not simply an experiment in your lab. It's not simply another paper you want to publish. And through that, I think the universities have done a really good job in Singapore. I know they have a lot of boot camps. They have a lot of information sessions. Their industry offices have really reached out to industrial partners to bring them in to have really early on discussions, even with undergraduates. So even in secondary schools, I think they're bringing in industrial people to give the students a little more insight into what it really means to be part of deep tech or technology-driven companies. So I don't think there is, at least from where we sit, all these initiatives are definitely moving in the right direction.
Yeah, but do you think that there's enough talent to go around? So that's actually Timothy's next question, right? And something that I've been wanting to understand also. So in SGInnovate, we have a team that actually looks at talent development, and one of the key issues that we are always trying to, one of the things that we are always trying to see is are there enough? Is the local funnel of efficient enough in producing the right types of talent, especially for the biotech industry, right? Considering so between the three of you, all of you got your degrees overseas. Right. So I'm trying to understand, domestically, are we self-sufficient, right? And if not, how can we help to supplement that?
It takes a long time. It does. Sorry. I'll just say it real quickly. It does take a really long time to develop talent, and it will be. We have starting today. We'll probably have our maybe first batch of VP research who will be suitable, have the right set of experience, probably in 10 years' time or more. So it's not a let's turn the crank today. Tomorrow we'll get all these wonderful CEOs in Singapore.
Agree.
I was just going to add on that I think nowhere in the world, including the Bay Area, including Boston, feels like they have enough talent that's available. Right? So I would say, frankly, it's an issue everywhere, because what we're doing is so technical and specialized and also difficult, right? I would say that. If you look at it in the U.S., it's not that all the talent that's there is from the U.S., right? Actually, historically, having a place where they can actually draw people from the outside has been a real advantage for the U.S.
Yeah.
Clearly that should theoretically be a big advantage for Singapore, right? And so, and I think there are problems that are really driven off kind of larger structural, political, and other dynamics. But clearly, I think Singapore has a lot of the right kind of systems in place to hopefully be able to, kind of see out the next 10, 20 years in which the talent pool does grow.
Cool, thank you. I wanted to also thank everyone who's been actively engaging. Our participants are actually answering questions for the other participants. So this is, it's not common, but thank you. We appreciate, folks within the industry trying to help each other here. I'm gonna go on to this question from Kevin, right? Because that's something that I thought may be interesting. Hi everyone, I'm trying to set up a company specialized on virus development for cell therapy companies. I tried to apply for many grants in Singapore the past few months, and I have the impression Singapore is now completely focused on fighting COVID-19. right? Do you share the same feeling? And if you do, what can be done to broaden back the horizon of the funding to other diseases and issues? So in your work, has this been apparent in terms of, you know, a lot of resources domestically being or globally being diverted towards finding cures or finding, you know, intermediary remedies for COVID-19?
If I can just jump in and just say, I personally know a lot of folks in A-STAR. I know a lot of folks in the government sector. Trust me, everybody's focused on the COVID-19 issue. Everybody wants to solve this issue. I don't think there's a country in the region who wants it as badly as Singapore. Putting a lot of resources behind this. If there are some really good technologies, I do believe that they will jump on and take a look at it. And I would say maybe perhaps continue reaching out, seeing if the right folks are getting involved in these discussions.
Nice. Okay, let me just quickly scan through. Okay, we are actually out of time. We're at 12 p.m. You know, I promise you guys I will try to make sure that I get you guys off for lunch. But maybe before we end, you know, if I could get just a quick, you know, like 30 seconds or a minute, you know, from each of you in terms of what are some of the dreams that you have for the industry, right? And you know, and where do you hope to see it go? Right, and beyond just, you know, I want a good world, I want cures, but where do you think, you know, in your mind is ideal state of where we should be headed? So just to end off on a different note, you know, yeah, and let's start with let's reverse it. Let's start with Max this time.
Sure. Personally, since Singapore started this 30 by 30 initiative, I can definitely envision the ecosystem and technology in this food tech space to actually grow it. The fact that Singapore is a country that has food security issues, I can definitely see it leading the way out of necessity and actually play a much bigger part globally using these technologies. So overall, we've had some great support, but I do believe many of the new startups that are coming on board, they will also get just as much, if not more, support from different agencies and support system in Singapore. So within the next 5 to 10 years, I can definitely see it being a power in the food tech space, along with countries like Israel and these other folks that are also doing amazing work. Thank you, Max.
Jeff?
Yeah, sure. So I guess for our industry in the pharmaceutical sector, I guess we would love to see, and we're building towards a vision where a patient can go for treatment and can get the right drug for themselves based on what their biology actually demands. And so, you know, that is kind of one of the broader kind of ambitions for what we're trying to do, and certainly what the industry is moving towards. But I'm just going to double click down on that. I think in order to achieve that, we're going to need and want to see a lot of change happening. So I think that there's going to be a lot of continued development on actually being able to find the patients in the clinic based on their genetics, and actually being able to drive a very tight linkage between the patient genetics and actually what the right targets and the right drugs should be, and actually having you know, the processes and the platforms in place to actually get there in a more efficient fashion. Because if you think about pricing pressures that are inevitably going to happen in the US and elsewhere in the world for drugs, it may not be sustainable in the long term to be able to charge the kind of prices we have. Hence, the only way for a sustainable profit-making industry is going to be by driving down some of the cost of production, right? And that's baked in all the current R&D. So we also need an industry that's getting there faster, and in addition to actually getting it faster / cheaper, in addition to actually having the right solutions in place.
Thanks, Jeff. And Wenqi?
Yeah, so taking it home to Singapore a little, I think for me, the vision, or at least the real goal for us, is to develop Singapore's own flavor of a life science ecosystem. And personally, I would love to see a really healthy and thriving therapeutics sector here, with this new train of people coming through, you know, been there, done that, come back, and they built more companies and develop our own area and our own flavor of what this means, and not the Bay Area, not Boston, not whatever else, but really a Singapore's own flavor of this industry. So that's the hope.
Nice. Thank you so much, guys. Today has been a really fun session, truly enlightening for myself, and hopefully for the many participants who are still on, so we've had a minimal drop off, and thanks again for your time. Thank you everyone for your questions. We really appreciate questions. I'm sorry we couldn't answer all of it, right? But feel free to reach out to us if there are areas that we can help to provide clarity on. And before I end this time, I remembered I'm going to ask Zing to come back on to share anything else that we have to share with the participants.
Yeah, okay. So thank you, Victor, Jeff, Wen-Qi, and Max for the great and engaging panel discussion. And thank you to all attendees for your time and questions. Do connect with us on our various social media channels and keep an eye out for a post-event EDM with a link to the recording of the session. And if you'd like to connect with our speakers, as many have asked to do so, we will check in with them if they're open to sharing their LinkedIn contacts, and we'll link it in the post-event EDM. So do keep an eye out for that. We will also be having another event with SINERGY on 30th September, so do mark your calendars, and we'll be providing more information on our website soon. We do hope to see you at future events, and have a great day ahead. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks.